Hello, friends. We are back. This is Alfyn. I'm with J&G Real Estate, your local Reno and Sparks real estate professional. And for anybody that doesn't know who Jeremiah is, Jeremiah, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, hello. It's good to be back here. My name is Jeremiah. I'm with Guild Mortgage. I'm a loan officer and been in the business, yeah, a long time these days.
Yay! Yeah, and we have such an interesting topic, and I feel like I get this a lot. So this is going to be super
Yeah.
beneficial for anyone that's in this situation, of course, or if I'm sure you know one or two people that is in this spot. So we're going to
Yeah.
talk about some rates, right? If you've locked into a 2 to 3% interest rate a few years back, and now you're feeling totally stuck and that life just does not fit you anymore, then this video is for you. Or if you know anyone, tag them below because you definitely want to hear this, right? A lot of people, because I door knock here and there, and with the people I talk to, they're like, yeah, we're growing this space, but I love my rate. Or, yeah, this is the wrong neighborhood, but I love my rate.
Hmm.
Or I feel like I need
Yeah.
to have a bigger house, but I love my rate, right? Another
Hmm.
thing I get is my family is here, an hour, 2 hours away, but I love my rate. So they feel
Hmm.
like a lot of people that I have talked to feel like they're stuck, right? So we want to kind of talk about why is there that fear and pressure of staying. So Jeremiah, what do you think? Do you think this is 100% right? Like, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, and I agree, like a lot of people are nervous about, like, okay, I bought, during, COVID times, or maybe even I bought at a normal interest rate, but I refinanced into a lower interest rate. And since then, like I haven't wanted to make the move for whatever the reason might be. And so a lot of people
Yeah.
find themselves in that boat, right? But what I think is most important is you have to remember that we only have one life, right? So like, are you going to stay in that house, just because the interest rate is 2% or 3 or 4%? Like, is it worth it, right? So like, we have to look at a couple different things. We have to look at the numbers. Does it make sense, to maybe move on from that house? Does it make sense
Hmm.
to keep it? Does it make sense to look into the equity and see if there's anything that we could tap into to buy a different property and rent that one out if it has a low interest rate? Like, a lot of people do that, right? Because maybe you can afford that. And interestingly so, you can still use like certain down payment programs and still own a residence outside of the state that you're purchasing in. So people that moved in from California and they want to move to Reno, you can still use a down payment program in Nevada and still retain a
Hmm.
residence. So there's a lot of cool things out there, that I think a lot of people don't realize, and you don't have to be limited.
Absolutely. And in anyone's life, I feel like even just looking at mine, people go through a lot of life changes. Your life has changed. You've clearly outgrown the home. You think, new baby, blended family, right? Working from home full time, multi-generational, home. So there's different scenarios. You need a backyard, you need an office, all that stuff. So Jeremiah, when do you see this kind of situation? What do you walk people through?
Well, I think it just depends, right? Because a lot of people are in that situation. And then we have to figure out what the reason is. Are you wanting, like you're kind of talking about, and I have a puppy, so that's why I keep, my attention. Um, he is trying to do all sorts of things that we're training. So, anyways, but
No.
so we, as you know, so, but it just depends on what the motivation is, right? So, like if you bought a home at a really low interest rate or you refinanced and then now like you have a kid and maybe you need an extra room. Or, a good example is I actually kind of have clients that fit into that. We have a pair, that's really young. They're in their mid 20s and they bought a property, together, and they got married, and their rate's like 3.125 or something like that. And
That's
um,
awesome.
but now they're, pregnant, and she's like, we need another room. So what are we gonna do, right? And I think it just depends on what the motivation is. Number one, all that to say. So why are we selling? Is it for a family? Is it a job? Is it because Maybe our salaries increased and we want a different type of lifestyle at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever the reason is. And then number two, do the numbers work? Because we have to realize that your payment will be more
Yeah.
most of the time, right? If you're paying, $2,000 a month because your interest rate's 2%, you know, if your interest rate's 6% or 6.5%, which isn't an abnormal interest rate, we have an abnormal perspective. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
something that we have to remember is a 6% interest rate or even 6.5 or 7% is not abnormal. That is the actual market average over the last like 40 something years. So we have these little pockets of low interest rates, but not overall is that the norm, right? So it just
Absolutely.
depends on what your situation is. And I think that that is the biggest thing we have to figure out is what do we want to do in long term, right? We have someone else that they just paid off their residence because their interest rate was so low and they were able to make extra payments, and pay it off early, essentially. And now they're like, well, I have to sell it. And it's like, well, do you have to sell it? Do you want to build a portfolio of some sort? What's the plan?
Mm.
And kind of broadening those perspectives, right?
Yes, I love that. Giving options like, oh, maybe this could be a portfolio builder. Like, what if you want to
Yeah.
invest and just start building your real estate portfolio? I love that. So, speaking with that, with moving life changes, could you give like a very simplified version of payment, how payment would look like depending on different rates?
What do you mean?
So, for example, let's say at a 2.75% example, you're looking at 2000 compared to X amount that could look like 2600 a month. And that would, looking it in a bigger picture, that's what is $600 difference. Like, I'm throwing numbers at
Yeah.
this point,
Yeah.
but this is
I
just an
mean,
example. That way, like, people can just look like, hey, with
well, yeah.
a $500 difference or $600 difference,
Mhm.
you can move from this type of lifestyle to a lifestyle that you want for you and your family?
Yeah, I think the perspective that we have to figure out is like, what is the most that because this is how I have always approached it, right? So, like, what is the most beneficial move for you? Because if you're renting, right, and you're like, gosh, I really want to own a house, and you run the numbers with the lender, and it just doesn't make sense, right? Because maybe you pay, 1,800 bucks a month for rent, and then if you want to buy a house that you really like, maybe your payments 3,800, like that's a $2,000 difference, right? And so we have to ask ourselves because a lot of people don't realize if you're paying rent, you're paying rent, yes, and you get nothing from that. But if you take a loan, you're still paying interest and you get nothing from
True.
that either. So, like, you're renting from the bank or you're renting from the landlord in a way with a small amount going to your principal every month. And if you keep the home long enough, it can make sense, right? So we
Yeah.
have to figure out what makes sense for them overall. So if you're paying, let's say, at a 3% interest rate or 2% interest rate, $2,000 a month, and then the house you want at a 6% interest rate is 3,000 or 2,500. Is it worth it to you to spend an extra 500 bucks? And most of the time, it is if you can find a home that you like, right? That also aligns with the motivations for the reason that you're making all these moves. And so, as an example, for that person with, the home they just paid off, right? They're like, well, I have this money in here now, but do I want to move? Do I want to pay cash for the next property? Do I want to take a loan out? I was just paying 3,000. Do I want to go back to paying 3,000? Like, what is the plan overall? And what can you afford? Because first time home buyers, right? Like we might only have a couple different scenarios that we can go with. And if you cannot afford the difference in the payment, then it's not a good option. But if you can, right? And then it makes sense, then I always advocate to invest into real estate because it will be beneficial, right, for a long
Yeah.
time, most of the time, right? So that's how
And
I
I
kind of
feel
think about
like
it.
that's the difference. The difference between being scared and feeling stuck to knowing your options, knowing what's out there, and what the bigger picture is going to look like, right?
Yeah.
So, second scenario, you have a ton of equity, but your finances can feel messy, like you have high interest rate with credit cards, car loans, and or you want to start investing. So a lot of people don't even realize like the power of your home equity, right? So how would you approach that?
Yeah, like again, like you have to figure out. So like I have a good pair of clients. This actually is a good example. They don't have a ton of debt, but they have enough debt where they feel like this is a lot every month, right? We've got higher car
Mm-hmm.
loan payments, we've got credit card payments, we've got student loans, we have a mortgage, we have two
Yep.
kids, it just adds up, especially, when you go to the grocery store and it's like $7 million for like a quart or a cart full of groceries, right? So it's like really expensive. So a lot of people are in credit card debt, a lot of people are in all sorts of forms of consumer debt. And so when we
Yeah.
look at, okay, well, did you buy your home, a couple years ago? Do you have enough equity in there to make, it make sense to take something out, right? And so when you run the
Mm-hmm.
numbers, it can or cannot. But in a lot of instances, if you have like, 30% interest on your credit cards or whatever it is, right? Taking equity out at 10% or 8% or 9% is a lot less
Yeah,
than 20 or 30% and using those funds to overall eliminate. So when we ran the numbers, those people could save about $1,000 a month overall between all the differences that they could do.
absolutely. So I love that. So, with equity, you can have options like that to kind of like maneuver because what are you going to keep continuing with a 30% or a 10%?
Yeah,
You
like what is
decide.
the plan? Use your money for you, right? And I think it's just having access to that level of information overall.
And then I have one last scenario. So,
Yeah.
you know, when it does not make sense to move, you know, because I never want to make people feel that they're failing just because they're not buying or selling. Jeremiah, what do you typically say? You know what? Stay put for now. Like, do you have a scenario like that to where you're like, you know what? Maybe yes, you do need to stay put. Like, have you had something like that to
Yeah.
where elaborate a little bit?
To where like you run the numbers and it doesn't make the most sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, because I think when you, on both sides, real estate and the lending side, when we're running all sorts of scenarios for like pre approvals or, different, how much you're going to get, right? If you listed your home
Mm-hmm.
on the market during this time of year with this amount, how much would you earn? And, when you run that stuff, the math doesn't lie, right? Like the numbers don't lie. They tell you exactly what's going on and where everything would be, and there are,
Mm-hmm.
I would say, a lot of instances, most of the time, where it may not make the most sense,
Yes.
to go for like these higher price points, or like, we want to be approved for this or use down payment assistance, or like, all these different things. And it just depends on your exact scenario. So I think when we look at it, it's like, well, we ran all this, does it work or does it not?
Absolutely. So I love it. I love that we've run a couple scenarios and saw how it looks like because it's not going to work for everyone. Yes, if it makes sense, it makes sense. If it doesn't, stay put. Let's work on it. No problem. So,
Exactly.
um, let's definitely give people something super simple to work with. If someone is watching and is thinking, I've got a 2 to 3% rate and I'm not sure what to do, what are 3 questions they should ask themselves?
I would ask themselves, what is your motivation? And then what do you want your new monthly payment to be? And when do you want all that to happen?
That's amazing.
That's what
Yes.
I would ask. Like, those are the three things that I usually kind of go to, because those tell you everything you kind of need to know, right? Like, is the new payment going to make sense? How long is it going to take? um,
Yeah,
and, and do I really kind of want this overall?
absolutely. So, for anyone that's watching now or later, and you're thinking to yourselves, "Hey, I don't want to be trapped by my rate, but I also don't want to make a dumb move." Right? I'm sure everyone's thinking that. Like, I don't want to just mess it up and go forward with something, and it's gonna bite me later. No, do your uh first step is to definitely talk to someone. Look at your options, just like what Jeremiah said. Lay out the options. There could be different scenarios and there could be different solutions. So, our job here is to definitely educate, let you know where you stand and how where you can be, right? So if that's you or if that's somebody definitely comment or just text. My number is 775-544-5011. And then Jeremiah, go ahead and tell everybody how they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, you can just shoot me a text or give me a call at 775-771-8907, and I will get back to you.
Yay! Other than that, any other final words before we end this? And I look forward to, of course, more talks um, in the next following week. So, do you have any
Yeah.
other closing remarks?
No, just like if you're on the fence, like I know everyone is always so scared to run credit and send documents in and all this stuff. And it's just at the end of the day, it's just figuring out where you're at and getting a plan together. So I would just start.
Yay! Absolutely. Okay, so if it's helpful, definitely save it, share it, or even comment, tag a friend below, and we will see you next week.
Okay, have a good one. I'll see you soon.
Bye.